Hey, Matt from Hidden Machine here today with a video game review. We don't do a ton of reviews on the channel, but last month we received an offer for a review copy of a game called Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. Now, I was initially turned off. At first glance, it kind of seemed too good to be true. There's a lot of games out there that use a bunch of decent looking assets, and then they fall apart the moment you start playing them. Seeing that this game was still in early access, and that the Steam page warned me about bugs and an overall lack of polish, I was ready to just pass on covering the game. We receive a fair number of keys or offers for keys from developers hoping to have their game covered on the channel in one way or another, but over the years we've kind of stopped doing as many reviews, unless it's something that we really feel passionately about. But as I kept looking at this game, I was really curious, and so I decided, hey, worst case scenario, I'll throw it into one of our roundup videos that we do every other month or so, and I'll cover the game because I'm hoping it's good. It looks pretty intriguing. It looks like it's something kind of tailored to my tastes. So I took a gamble on it. I installed the game, launched it, and 3 hours later, I realized that 3 hours had passed. So needless to say, I was really enjoying the game. But the game in its current state is not without its flaws. So is Tainted Grail, the Fall of Avalon, worth picking up in early access? Well, I'm gonna go through that in this video. As of today, the game received its first major update patch, version 0.6, which added support for 4 new languages, redesigned environments, improved performance all across the board, and there's new quests, new NPCs, new systems. Basically, if you played this game before the patch, you are definitely in for a greatly improved experience. In this video, I'll be sharing my experiences with the game and hopefully giving you the information you need to make an informed decision when it comes to Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, and whether or not you should pick it up in early access. But before we go any further, of course, I need to thank our supporters over on Patreon. If you are in a position to help the channel grow, even $1 a month helps us a lot. It goes a long way. Longer than you could ever know, all right? Big time, long time. And of course, we got YouTube memberships and super thanks and all that other stuff here. So if you just want to kick us a few bones, I'm throwing cat hair at the camera as I talk. Anyway, thanks to anyone who's been helping out the channel. Please throw us a sub if you haven't yet. We're growing at a alarming rate. I'm hoping to reach, let's say 10K by the end of this week, all right? Let's see if we can get there. If we can get there, then I'll be amazed. Anyway, let's get into the video. I'll try to keep things as spoiler-free as possible here. The early access version of the game only includes the first chapter, so there's still a lot of stuff that hasn't yet been added. But that first chapter took me just about 18 hours to fully explore and do all the side quests and parts of the main quest that were available. So depending on how many chapters are planned, the full game could get pretty lengthy. As for the game itself, as you can see in the footage, you've probably never played anything like this before. No, I'm kidding. It plays exactly like Skyrim. The controls, the way you level up, the lock-picking minigame, it's all Skyrim. But that is in no way a detriment to this game. Skyrim has some great systems, and that's a big reason why it's been such a massive success. What I think Skyrim lacked was a strong variety of interesting quests. There were some standout quests, for sure, but for me, a lot of the writing and locations just sorta fell short. I didn't always care what NPCs had to say, especially since they were often just sending me out on what felt like fetch quests. While The Fall of Avalon is obviously a much smaller game than Skyrim by literally every measure, I feel that the writing, characters, and locations in this game are quite a bit stronger than a lot of what Skyrim had to offer. I know that Starfield wasn't supposed to be Skyrim in space, but to be totally honest, after about 35 hours with the game, it still feels a little clunky to me. The menus are bloated, I'm constantly running out of stamina, and sometimes it feels like I'm just doing more of this kind of forced fast travel thing than actually exploring any locations. I bought into the early access period of Starfield, and while I do enjoy the game, I'm not tripping over myself to put time into it. On the other hand, I put 21 hours into the Fall of Avalon in just the first 2 days that I had access to the game. I couldn't put it down. It felt immediately familiar in so many ways, but that mix of wonder, danger, and exploration that can come from these sorts of open world RPGs was just so much more readily available to me in Fall of Avalon than it was in Starfield. And I found that to be so exciting that I was able to easily overlook the bugs and lack of polish that are present in the game. But I know that some people are more sensitive to that kind of stuff, so I will eventually get into the specifics of what sort of issues I experienced in the game. To keep things organized, from here on out, I'll cover the presentation, the basic story, character building, which will include skills, gear, and combat. We'll talk about the quests and locations, I'll go over the technical stuff, and then I'll wrap it up with a final verdict. There are going to be chapter markers down below, so you can skip around as you see fit. I'll be saying this a lot in the video, but in general, the game looks very similar to Skyrim. However, it does still have a unique visual identity when it comes to the overall feeling of the world. The game has a dark, ominous vibe, which I think is enhanced by the game's score. I never found myself getting tired of this music, and it always helped to kind of immerse me in that overall mood of the game. Sound design in general is pretty strong at the moment, and I was really taken aback by how solid the voice acting is. All interactions that you have are fully voiced, and every character sounds really good.
Yes. Still tastes like shit.
I can't, but that doesn't really concern you, does it?
You'll have to forgive them.
Emotion is convincingly conveyed, and there's not any awkward pronunciations or errors in the grammar. It just really goes way beyond what I've seen in a lot of indie games in recent years. While the game isn't trying to achieve a AAA level of polish or presentation, I still think the team does a really great job with what they have, and the lighting and color palettes of different areas give each location a very striking and distinct look. The Fall of Avalon is a game in the Tainted Grail series. I've had a hard time finding a concise sort of explanation of how it all works and how it all ties together in terms of continuity, but it all seems to stem from a 2019 board game called Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. The game was a success on Kickstarter, and it was followed by 2 PC games. Tainted Grail Conquest, which is a roguelike deck-building game with some RPG elements, and the Fall of Avalon, that I'm talking about here today. These games all play on the story of King Arthur and the Arthurian legends, but they twist it all and present it with a unique take that's influenced by Celtic mythology, as well as Welsh, Irish, and Scottish folklore. I'm not going to give away anything specific about where the story goes, but you wake up as a prisoner who finds himself in the middle of a very complex power struggle that is taking place on multiple planes of reality. The original King Arthur and his knights are long dead, and now the names of the different knights of the Round Table are titles given to different people as they serve the kingdom. The world here is very complex, and there are a lot of different social, political, and spiritual groups all interacting in different ways. Throughout your time with the game, you'll have a chance to see all these different groups and decide who you want to align yourself with. Again, I don't want to give too much away, but even this opening chapter of the game does a lot to make these different factions feel alive and vital. If you're someone who is into this sort of world building, I think you're going to have a lot of fun talking to different characters and learning all about how everything is connected. Rather than being some sort of all-powerful hero, your character is more of a blank slate, this outsider who is seen as a fairly neutral force at first. You'll have ample time to really get a read on the situation before making any decisions that would align you with one group or another, but overall, you're rolling things as realistic and kind of makes sense in terms of the overall balance of everything going on. At the moment, character creation is pretty basic, feeling close to something like what you'd see in a From Software game. There's a few different looks, but ultimately none of it matters too much because the only time you'll see your character is on the inventory screens. There's no third-person view in this game, although the devs haven't entirely ruled out the possibility of it coming in a future update. Your character has 6 basic stats: strength, endurance, dexterity, spirituality, practicality, and perception. There are also skills tied to each of the stats, which act as specific perks like increased carrying weight or being able to slow time while drawing your bow. You earn experience points by doing stuff, whether that's jumping around to increase agility or taking damage to increase your armor skill. Get enough experience points amassed and you'll level up, which will then give you stat points and skill points to put into your stats and skills. Again, this works pretty similar to Skyrim. There are basic systems for crafting and upgrading armor and weapons, as well as a cooking system, a system for making potions, and, as of the most recent update, you can go fishing. Armor and weapons that you can equip come in different weight classes, and those weight classes will have a direct effect on how much stamina you use when moving around and engaging in battle. You can dual wield weapons and spells, and again, the game feels very much like Skyrim in this regard. The melee combat isn't amazing, archery is probably overpowered, and I didn't really mess around too much with the magic, but it's all here for you to play around with and see what works best for you and your role-playing. You can block attacks to wear down an enemy's stamina, and eventually stagger them, which leaves them open to massive damage. Overall, I had a lot of fun with the combat, even the sword stuff, which I usually don't get into. It's definitely nothing revolutionary, but it's competent, and the pacing of the battles always felt appropriate to me. The map here isn't overwhelmingly large, but there are a lot of points of interest to find. Pretty much everything is connected through a series of roads. Along those roads, there are fast travel points that you can unlock. There are a bunch of huge, interesting looking landmarks to find, and overall, I felt that navigation was really intuitive, and there were only a few minor instances where I lost track of a specific NPC or location. While quests will give you markers on your map, the game does not do as much hand-holding as a lot of other Bethesda games might do. There were plenty of quests where I was directed to a general area or given some general instructions, and then left to my own devices when figuring out how to move forward. There are several caves and dungeon-like areas that again remind me a bit of something like what we'd see in a From Software game. Just something about their design and flow reminded me of my time with Elden Ring. These areas might recall something else for you, but that's the vibe that I got, and I really enjoyed exploring these. Even within those dungeons and caves, there was always something new to discover. Whether it was loot, quest items, minerals to mine, NPCs to interact with, or enemies to battle. There was a lot of verticality to these sections, and a bunch of twisting and sometimes intersecting routes to explore. Above ground was the same thing. I was constantly running into something new to interact with, but not in that sort of open world game way where you're just doing like collectathon stuff. Instead, I found myself regularly picking up new quests, or moving forward in quests that I had already started. I was hunting different wildlife, and battling all sorts of ghouls and bandits, and just taking in a really awesome looking landscape. One of my favorite things about this game is just how otherworldly it is. The look of this stuff really keeps things interesting for me, and it all ties into the lore if you take the time to dig into that kind of stuff. The quests that you'll receive generally have you seeking out items or information, and then returning to your quest giver, but it never really feels like you're doing generic fetch quest type stuff. Even the most simple quests, which really just have you talking to a series of NPCs in different locations, feel especially significant due to the strength of the writing. Everything you encounter feels alive and relevant, which makes for a very immersive RPG. That strong writing, combined with the time-tested mechanics adopted from games like Skyrim, create a very engaging experience, and overall, it was enough for me to be relatively unbothered by the game's technical shortcomings. I played just over 3 hours of the game before applying the 0.6 update, so I can't say too much about how the game has improved with this new patch, but I did notice a general increase in stability and polish in those opening hours once I applied the patch and started the game over. I definitely felt like the game was a bit sluggish once I finished the opening tutorial area, but that seemed to go away after a few minutes, as if the game just had to load in the textures or something. Speaking of loading, load times between different areas or booting up a save file are usually about 20 seconds or less, which is totally fine by me. And it's infrequent enough that I don't think it should be an issue for anyone. Aside from loading a save file, the only other loading screens I saw came up when entering or exiting any kind of interior structure, or when I used the fast travel points. The overworld and exterior areas all seemed pretty much seamless and didn't have any noticeable loading times. In my 21.5 hours with the game, I had 2 crashes, both occurring in the same spot, where I was trying to exit this cave and I just couldn't for some reason. I wound up shutting down the game, opening it up again, and the problem fixed itself. The blacksmith here was prone to some obviously broken animations, doing a sort of supernatural zoomies from his bench to this work area. But aside from that, animations are pretty smooth. I didn't really notice any weird clipping or other visual or audio glitches, although I'm sure mileage will vary when it comes to that kind of stuff. My biggest complaint right now has to do with the lack of polish. Certain aspects of the game just feel a little confusing due to the state that they're in. I mostly felt this with certain quests and talking to certain NPCs. Like, once you've exhausted all your dialogue options with most NPCs, you can still attempt to speak to them. And while some will acknowledge you, others won't, which left me feeling unsure if those interactions were bugged or not. I also found a few instances where I got a quest item or info about a quest seemingly out of order, which made progression on those quests feel confusing. I had one quest in particular that I just couldn't complete, and it wound up being because it was tied to another quest, but that was never clearly communicated to me, so I just went around unsure of what to do. However, these issues only applied to a very small number of quests, like maybe 3 at most, and in general, quests work really well. Personally speaking, I'm not really a graphics or frame rate guy. I mean, I like when stuff looks good to me, but I kind of think that people sound stupid when they complain about things like minor frame rate dips. You've seen my footage here. I think the game looks great, especially for a game that's being made by such a small team, but you'll have to judge for yourself if this meets your standards. Obviously, the game is still in development, and it's not without its flaws, but if you're an RPG fan, especially someone who enjoyed stuff like The Outer Worlds, Fallout 4, Skyrim, I think you'll have a really good time with what's on offer here. I am totally hooked on this game and will have no issue starting a fresh save file when the next major update drops. I can confidently recommend the game in its current state, with the caveat that it can be a little bit rough around the edges at points. But if you're a player who can overlook some minor bugs or lack of polish, go for it. So that's my take on the game, but I'm curious what you think. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know, are you going to pick up Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon? Have you played the other Tainted Grail games? Are you aware of this series? Are you just like a big King Arthur fan who wants to get into any King Arthur shit you can find? Let me know down below or hit me up on the Hidden Machine Discord. And until next time, see ya. Had to like sneeze this whole time and it has not come out.